In this video, we're taking a deep dive into the history of Arnie Beswick's 66 GTO named the Star of the Circuit. This was a world-famous funny car that raced before funny car was even a thing. It has some really unique features, it has a great backstory, and this car still survives to this day. So to tell the story of this particular GTO, we got to go back a few years and talk about Arnie Beswick's career in drag racing, because he was already very well established in the superstock ranks. He had been racing Pontiacs for years, and he had been running some factory-backed programs that included the aluminum front ends, the 421 Super Duty engines. I mean, these things were a potent combination that dominated the superstock ranks. And in 1963, he got involved in NHRA's factory experimental class with a pair of 63 Pontiac Tempests, a coupe and a station wagon. Both of these cars had the 421 Super Duty engine. Both of these cars were very good performers, but this factory experimental class changed very quickly and it evolved into something crazy by 1964 and got even crazier in 65 and beyond. So that's really where we're going to pick up here, is in 1964, that's when Arnie Beswick picked up a brand new 64 Pontiac GTO. These were pretty high dollar cars. These were brand new. These were the beginning of the muscle car era. And he picked up one of these things. It had a 389 in it. He took that out immediately and put a 421, just like his other cars had, and went out and raced in this factory experimental class. At this point, 1965, that's where we saw the altered wheelbase cars from the Chrysler camp. We saw those debut at the AHRA Winter Nationals in Arizona. We saw the blown and injected combination on nitromethane that Jack Chrisman was running. We had already seen the Dodge Chargers. That was a trio of supercharged, full-bodied Dodges that really were just exhibition cars. And by this point, this class was no longer contained into one particular rule set. The NHRA had its rules, the AHRA had its rules, and then there was a whole nother breed of these cars that didn't fit any rules. They went and match raced other similar cars. These cars were truly outlaws. They were put together with combinations that did not make sense to any sanctioning body, but they made sense to the spectators. They made sense to the track promoters. They made sense to the racers, because this was an unbelievable time in drag racing history. So he builds a completely off-the-wall combination with a stock wheelbase, stock bodied 64 GTO. The only not stock details on the body of this car is it had a one-of-one aluminum front end on it. So the aluminum front end was a thing that happened in 62 and 63, but it was not a thing in 64, and somehow, some way, Arnie got his hands on this aluminum front end. So by 1966, a lot of things were changing. He ran his 63 Tempest, which had been damaged in a transporting crash, and he altered the wheelbase on it, moving the rear axle way forward, putting a blown and injected combination in there. And this car was known as the Tameless Tiger. It is an iconic altered wheelbase car, and he ran this during 1966. While he also ran a more purpose-built 66 car. This was a 66 GTO, brand new body style, and it was a full fiberglass body, but it was not a one-piece tilt at the back flip-top body like what the Mercury guys were running. This looked much more like a factory-produced car. In fact, he didn't alter the rear part of the wheelbase, he only stretched the front. And in order to do that, he took the original 64 GTO frame from his 64 GTO, and he had Logie put a round tube front end on it, stretching the wheelbase a little bit. When he did that, he also moved the engine way back, up under the cowl, way back into the driver's compartment, and you'll see on this car that he is sitting way back in the driver's compartment, and he's sort of offset. He's kind of in the middle, but not quite. This was a really unique combination here, and you'll see it had a lot of aluminum tin work on the inside. It had one little seat, and you actually straddled the transmission. So you had your throttle pedal way over here to the right, and you had your brake set up over here on the left. This was a crazy combination, but it was par for the course for these really wild match race cars. Again, there was no such thing as a funny car eliminator in 1966 when this car was built. So this thing had a wild combination, it had a wild paint job, and it quickly became known as the Star of the Circuit because of something an announcer said at one of the races that really stuck with this car. And there was even a front spoiler or an air dam that was built for this thing. You can see it was made out of aluminum, and then it was hand lettered. It says right there, Star of the Circuit. So Arnie Beswick was getting a lot of match race dates with this car as well as the Tameless Tiger altered wheelbase car. These things were two totally different schools of thought as far as this type of car, but they were both crowd pleasers. They were both really cool combinations. So one of the things that Arnie wanted with this 66 build was for it to look more like a stock-bodied car than his 63 Tempest, which had that very unusual altered wheelbase look that spawned the term funny car. But he wanted this 66 car to look more like a production-ready car, and what he wanted was the injector hat and blower to be tucked up under the cowl, so number one, he could get the engine far enough back to put enough weight on the rear tires to give him traction, and then that also kept the front end of the car looking just like a factory GTO, except it's a little bit longer than factory. But this combination really hit home with a lot of the people who were coming to these races, because everybody agreed that the funny cars of early days, the altered wheelbase cars, were funny looking. They didn't look like what you could go to the dealership and get. And even though this car had a vibrant paint job with a lot of hand lettering and a really cool look all the way around, it still had that 66 GTO look. And the car did exactly what Arnie needed it to do, which was go out there and win races, put a smile on people's faces, and eventually get booked for more match races. So when Arnie put this combination together, he used, again, a 421 Super Duty based engine. It was actually the same engine that he had been using in the Mystery Tornado 64 GTO. It had factory 980 heads. It had a factory bottom end. It had forged steel crank and just the original Super Duty rods and pistons, but he eventually changed them out for Mickey Thompson pistons to lower the compression slightly. Then he put Mickey Thompson aluminum rods, an Isky cam. You know, he really evolved this combination, number one, so that it would last. He was blowing a lot of head gaskets, a lot of parts breakage, just trying to make this thing competitive. And by changing some of these things out, it made more horsepower and is much more reliable. So with this combination, he actually ran a mostly stock Turbo 400 automatic transmission, a shortened 64 GTO drive shaft, and then the famous big Pontiac rear end out back. Now, in most of his previous combinations, especially in those class cars, he was running high-test gasoline. But in the 66 car, he ran alcohol from day one. And after he started upgrading the bottom end with the aluminum rods, the better pistons, he started running nitromethane. Now, even with those upgrades, he was still running a relatively low mixture, like 10 to 15% of nitromethane, but that was really all the tracks could handle back at this period of time. The 66 car, especially early in the year, they were pouring everything they could into making this thing go down the track, and it did exceptionally well. This thing went out and made an 873 pass at 173 miles an hour. This was the first full quarter-mile pass with this car. Later in the year and throughout 67 and even into 1968, he continued racing this car and got it down to an 848 and 178 miles an hour at US 30 in Indiana. This thing was a wild combination, but it wasn't nearly as aggressive as some of the other cars on the circuit. But by 1967 and 1968, this thing was completely outdated. So in 1968, he built a new car, a full tube chassis car, single-piece fiberglass body. It had a flip top, although the 68 GTO flip top car flipped in reverse to what we're used to now. But these cars continued to get a lot of attention. They continued to win races. So by 1969, this car was completely outdated. He had already built another GTO funny car, and he sold this one to a fellow drag racer in Indiana. And then in the 1980s, he got his hands on it again and sold it a second time in May of 1991, and the car got a complete restoration. And then eventually, he arranged the sale of the car to his previous crew chief, John Holmes, in February of 2003. So this thing went on quite a journey, and somehow, some way, didn't get cut up or tossed to the side or scrapped or parted out. This car continued to remain, even though it had withered in condition. the bones of this thing were still there, and it inspired a really cool restoration that's still holding up to this day. This car still gets toured around. In fact, I saw it at the Pontiacs and Pigeon Forge show earlier this year, and it was great to be able to see this car. They had the front end flipped forward so you can see into the engine area, the engine set way back into the cowl. You could see all of that original chassis work, but you could also see some of the work that they had done to bring this thing up into the modern era. So one of the biggest goals of restoring this car was not just to create a museum piece, but to also be able to race this car again. So John Holmes and a lot of other people put their heads together to make this thing NHRA legal, and he went out there and made lots of passes with this car. At first, he had no intentions of really leaning on this combination, and it went out there and ran a 928 at 144 miles an hour. Now, John said it had a little more throttle to go, but it felt uncomfortable because of a front end shimmy and some other issues. But he went back and he tuned on the car and got it straightened up. This thing went back and made a comparable pass, 853, compared to what it used to run back in the day, which was 840s was the best it ever ran. Pretty amazing that somebody would have the guts to go out there and take a historic car and lean on it that hard to go an 853. So this thing is not just a museum piece. It's not just an ornament of what it used to be. This is a functional race car, and it's paying tribute to Arnie Beswick's legacy. Arnie's still out there going to shows. He's still out there putting a smile on people's faces, and he's been doing it for all these years. Whether he's drag racing or at a car show, wherever he goes, Pontiac lovers and drag racing lovers in general love to come see him and learn about some of the drag racing history. So I've enjoyed being able to tell you a little bit about this 66 Star of the Circuit GTO, and I hope you enjoyed following along with the history of this car. Thank you for watching.